Ladies and gentlemen, super humbled to be part of today's event at the IGDA Leadership Day. Um, I think we've all received a lot of support from the community around us of developers and people who support game developers in general in Helsinki. And I'm happy to be part of giving back in my own little way. So today I want to talk a little bit about leading fast and slow. It is something that I have thought about increasingly during the pandemic as well, and kind of brought to my mind the merits of actually leading slow. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and some general reflections on leadership. And hopefully this raises questions. It might not have all the answers, and you certainly don't need to agree with me, but if it's thought-provoking, and hopefully you enjoy this little escapade into leading fast and slow. Here we go. So obviously, I've been inspired by Daniel Kahneman, Nobel-winning writer, psychologist on thinking fast and slow. So one of the basic points that he does make in his book is that we often make wrong decisions. And when we make decisions, we often rationalize them with illogical arguments that don't really hold water. And I started to reflect on, what would it be if we started to also think of in those terms about leadership in general. And often our first assumptions and our first choices aren't the right ones. All right. So putting this into context a little bit and to the evolution of leadership. I've talked about this before, but I think as you look at the kind of current leadership and the future leadership, you'll start to kind of reflect on the benefits of leading slow in these circumstances as well. Now, first off, let me get it off the table. There is a worship of speed in society. We want faster internet, faster phones, faster food delivery, you name it. Everything needs to be fast. And there's a worship of how speedy things happen and how speedy things evolve and so forth, and how quick somebody is. In general, I appreciate that and understand that. But there is the other side of the argument as well. Sometimes you don't want the quickest food available. Sometimes you actually want to sit down for a 3-course meal and go through the process as well, because often it's not quite the same thing as a Big Mac is to a 3-course Michelin star meal. So Eisenhower had some awesome words of wisdom when he said, "What is urgent is seldom important. What is important is seldom urgent." Now, oftentimes as leaders and managers, we get pulled into things that are imminent and urgent and require immediate attention. But often these things don't really fundamentally move the needle. When I say the needle, do they help you make a better product? Do they help you to build a more sustainable business? Do they help you to create a culture of excellence, a good culture that's healthy and something sustainable? Oftentimes, they don't even lead to good long-term tactics and plans or designs or business ideas. They're often super reactive, and basically the pace is being set by something else or someone else, not yourself. And oftentimes, the Eisenhower quadrant is a brilliant tool to use for vetting your own schedules and your own priorities as well. But I think these words of wisdom hold true. Now, if we put this into context throughout history and kind of look at the past, present, and future of leadership, I think you'll start to see where the benefits of slow leadership come into play. But in the past, leadership was very hierarchical. It was top down. So you see a lot of focus on authority, overseeing compliance, focused on correction, looking over the shoulder, enforcing the policy, managing the voices, and demanding subordination. Luckily, not a place where many of us work today, and not a field where many of us work today. I think the present, for most of us, looks like it does here by Nordstrom and Stewart. Strutt. So there's a large emphasis on coaching, motivation, overseeing performance. KPIs are everywhere. Focused on improvement. Can we do it better, faster, technically more advanced, optimized? And we're looking for results. We enforce productivity, and we accept perspective and demand cooperation between people. Now, a lot of us, I think, as I said, are there. In the future, leaders are seen to be more of removing the boundaries, overseeing the potential. And overseeing potential is very different from overseeing performance. Performance, you're trying to get people to do what they're doing better. Potential, you're trying to unlock things that they could maybe potentially do in the future. And removing boundaries as well. You're trying to bring different organizations, different departments, maybe even different organizations. And many of us work in environments where, either, we're not in the same physical location, or we don't necessarily work for the same company, outsourcing coming together, insourcing coming together, and removing those boundaries and making sure that people can cooperate and work together. And when we focus on possibility and not on improvement, we're looking at the possible. What isn't there yet? All of these take time. Unlocking that takes time. Looking for alignment, you need to understand people's motives, values, and their perspective, perhaps even their different culture. And you need to build that alignment. And that, once again, requires slow leadership and taking the time to actually talk to people and understand those perspectives. Enforcing a sense of purpose doesn't come overnight. Once again, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we here in the first place? And what is the purpose of the organization and your role in that? Organizing collaboration is very different from managing voices in the past. And demanding innovation is something that we all know takes time. It's a long road to innovation, and whether it's on a design matter, it's a business matter, or a technical issue. Looking for innovation requires a different environment and a different style to be successful and fruitful. Now, if we kind of mirror that against the two kinds of organizations that it highlights, is a learning organization versus a performance organization. A performance organization is very much driven by its targets, its KPIs, its goals, and really a fine-tuned machine to hit those, and constantly keeps on improving and tracking those. A learning organization, on the other hand, is one where mistakes do happen, and people look for different perspectives, look for new ways of doing things, look for an innovation here and there. In a learning organization, people can question why, or give a different perspective, or challenge the status quo. In a performance organization, it's much more focused on how can we do this better, how can we do this quicker, and how can we get on with it. There's an interesting kind of story that is in the book Think Again, about NASA and how it evolved from a performance organization into a learning organization. Now, the process was painful and even tragic. NASA had been super proud of sending spaceships, rockets up to space, and shuttles up to space, and how they had a track record of doing that in a timely manner. Often that meant overlooking some of the questions of minor defects, and basically not even necessarily knowing why a particular thing didn't function exactly, but it hadn't been a problem before. Now, that resulted in great tragedy and loss of life with the shuttle accident, and that started a change in the organization. Now, luckily, we create entertainment, and lives are not on the line, but there are elements there where that organization had to go through a change, and it started to empower people to ask questions and to basically raise your hand if you're not comfortable with the launch. And that required a big change, but it has actually resulted in some of those people who were the pioneers of asking those questions to be in leadership positions there today. Now we're going to do a poll. Do you work for a performance organization or a learning organization? Those are the options on the table today. Unfortunately, the draconian hierarchical one is off the table. So performance organization or learning organization. Just go to Twitter, redhillgames.com, and we have a poll, and would love to see the results of that at the end of this talk. Okay. So there are moments where leading fast is a good idea. It can be exhilarating. It can be fun, especially in startups. The progress is often pretty rapid. When you start from nothing, getting to something happens pretty quickly, and you incrementally and compoundedly build on that. But there are other moments where, leading fast really, really makes sense. I think the primary example is when the cost of doing nothing is too high, either the opportunity cost or the real cost. Now, if your child puts a hand on a cooker, you don't wait to educate them on the dangers of kitchen appliances. You take their hand off before it gets burned. And I think those moments exist in business as well. And when you need to shake people up. So I had this experience years ago when I was advising a very promising startup working on some interesting server solutions. Now, the founder and the team were super focused on building the best possible software, Six Sigma, no faults, what have you. And pretty quickly, when I started to delve into the business, I found that they have a massive accounts receivable problem. Now, this was an interesting problem for them to deal with. So it had kind of been neglected. What would happen is people could use their services and end up not paying, and they had no recourse to actually go back to them and get their money, but they still had the costs for the services that were provided. Now, I quickly looked at this and said, well, the more these people use your services and the less they pay you, the more costs you have and the less money you have coming in, and we have a first world problem. We have a real problem here. Sorry. And spoke to the founder, CEO, no real reaction. Felt that it was my duty to escalate it and went to the chairman, tried to explain the issue, kind of listened politely, nodded their head, and I could already tell before I finished that they weren't going to action anything. They were so enthralled with their wonderful software and the way it worked. Unfortunately, what happened was very shortly after, they had a cash crisis, and the company, as it then was, ceased to exist. You can obviously try to lead fast, and you can't always succeed. Well, you can try to lead, period, and you won't always succeed, but you must do your best. And that's my example of trying to solve an imminent problem in a fast manner and escalating things. The other one where I feel fast leadership is required is around toxicity. A toxic person enters a room, it takes about 2 minutes for them to basically infect the room. It's like a virus, it spreads. I'm not saying that the people around them necessarily become toxic, they can, but it sure dampens their enthusiasm. It doesn't lead to a wonderful environment. It's not a circumstance where you can ask for innovation or fun if somebody's being super toxic. And it can really dampen creativity, innovation, and productivity. And I think those are moments where you need to step in as a leader very quickly. Unfortunately, those moments, they can be glanting and a glimpse there, and you don't necessarily have enough to jump on. But I would urge to look at those when you see signs of toxicity. I'm not saying confront the issue in public and raise a big fuss. What I am saying, it is something to address sooner or later, maybe with a quiet one-on-one conversation or trying to understand what's really happening. All right. The Dunning-Kruger effect, my favorite. There is a cognitive bias stating that people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability, and that the people with high ability at a task underestimate their own ability. Now, what this in essence means, and there's various studies done around this, is people who are absolutely certain about something or give a response quickly often are wrong. It's the ones who are deliberating and rethinking their response that are more often correct. The ones who know enough to know that they might not know the correct answer. So I think there's the danger of not knowing anything. You basically don't answer. You know a little bit, and you think you know a lot. And I think the same applies to leadership problems or decision-making problems in general. When we look at a problem, I'm often now maybe with the benefit of age and a few war wounds. If I'm absolutely certain about something, I try to stop for a second and to rethink, do I have all the facts? Do I really understand everything? And not necessarily go with the gut instinct immediately. You can, but you do kind of go, it's like a multiple choice question. Was my initial answer correct? What are the other choices in this question? Responses to that question. So I do think there is something there. And what scares me is people who are absolutely convicted that this is the correct answer and the only correct answer. And oftentimes it turns out they're not as correct as we would think. I think decisiveness is overrated. There is this kind of cliche of, a strong leader leading the troops from the front and pushing ahead and has the vision, and I'm taking you there. Rethinking is not a weakness. So I would say, especially in the context of the games industry, where we have rapid change happening around us all the time. So we have technology changing, markets changing, consumer preferences changing, business models changing. In a rapidly moving environment, it feels, it just feels to be decisive and to hang on to ideas that you've previously come to and conclusions that you've previously come to. The facts around you may have changed. And being able to rethink is not a weakness. Another moment where I think slow leadership comes into play is when everybody's running around. We've seen those moments of excitement and joy around the studios, where people are super excited about a venture, they're super excited about a new idea or a solution or something, and everybody's just running in one direction. And those are the moments where, it's a good idea to take a deep breath, take a step back and go, okay, so these are all the awesome things that this brings. What are the drawbacks? And I'm not necessarily saying be a party pooper, but at least take those moments of breath to calm yourself down and look at it. Often if a deal is too good to be true, that's probably, there's a reason for that. Or if a technology is so wonderful and revolutionary that, artists don't even need to draw anymore, it'll kind of draw itself. There's probably something more to the package the middleware provider is providing you. And just saying in general. Okay. And the same applies if, people are super down and there's a crisis. I think it's a moment to take a deep breath and kind of reflect on that in general. As you might, I don't know if you know, but the term crisis comes from Greek tragedies when the main character's destiny is basically being chosen and defined. Where them being Greek tragedies, they often choose the wrong thing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be tragedies. But as leaders, we have a choice in those moments of crisis to also make the right choice and not to be the personal star of our own crisis and tragedy. Okay, speaking of which, this is a picture from the Miracle on the Hudson, where a plane took off from Newark and was hit by birds, lost the engines. Basically, pilot's flying a 70-ton glider and needs to make a choice of what to do next. You can try to turn back and land the plane on the airport. Maybe you don't have time to clear the planes off the tarmac, and that gets ugly. You could try to land on a street in the city, but collateral damage is more than likely. And then the captain had the bright idea of actually landing into the Hudson River on the coldest day of the year. This story has a happy ending. Everybody survived and got out alive. The captain walked up and down the aisle to make sure that there's nobody on the plane as water's coming in. And he basically executed the perfect emergency landing. When he was asked how he felt and what he did, he said he forced himself to be calm. Now, obviously, there's a lot of training and pre-thinking and things like that happening in the background, but it's not human to be calm in these situations. But what you can do as a good leader, as a good captain of your ship, is to force yourself to be calm in these moments and to make the right choices, to force yourself to think slow, even in a hectic situation. And I think that is something that, we can all draw inspiration from. Okay. So kind of on a more personal note, I think there is a benefit to also being stoic and slower to show your emotions or to act upon your emotions or things happening around you. We were fast on our way to pitch Alan Wake in the States with Petri Järvileto, and I get the phone call nobody wants to get. My wife was pregnant with our first child, 6 months, and they had had a car crash. And I pick up the phone. We don't know if they're going to be okay. Is the baby fine? What's happening? And kind of at that moment, you go through a lot of emotions and kind of go through uncertainty, distress. What have you, and luckily had the chance to talk at the hotel with Petri and kind of put things into perspective. There was nothing I could do at that moment, and we were going in for the biggest pitch of our lives. And at that point, I didn't want to take that negativity into the pitch room or the meeting room and into those encounters. I basically put those feelings into a box and decided I would deal with them later. We went in, the meetings went fantastically, and we got offers on the table. And as soon as I could, I flew back the next day to be back home. Now I'm sure there's psychologists in somewhere listening to this talk and going, that's probably not the way you should deal with these. But at least for me, in those moments when it's not going to help the team who's waiting for the deal to happen, it's not going to help the partners and the relationships to bring that negativity and that fear and doubt into the room, I decided not to do that and to address it later when there's something I can do with it and it would be constructive. Not everybody's able to compartmentalize that way, and I'm not sure it's even a virtue, but for me it does work. And maybe if your mind ticks that way, or you would like to have it tick that way, that's worth considering. I think on a smaller scale in our daily interactions, I think we do that all the time, and I strongly recommend that. If there's a slightly annoying small thing, but it's not imminent and urgent to actually deal with, then you can probably deal with that later and not jump on your kind of gut instinct of addressing an issue or dealing with something like that. Now, leading slow doesn't mean you can procrastinate. There is nothing worse than a leader who can't make a decision. I've been part of long strategy workshops with some of the best consultants in the world, looking at something for weeks on end, preparing, and then working on different strategies and paths forward, and a decision doesn't get made. There is a time for rethinking, but there's also a time to move forward and to make those choices. So thinking slow doesn't mean that you never come to a conclusion and move ahead. Now, some of the tools that help me think slow is a lot of it's preparation, to be honest. So you've kind of thought through in your head through different kinds of scenarios and different contingencies that can happen. And when they do happen, you're prepared. Now, one of my favorite tools is a pre-mortem. There's a lot of post-mortems done in the games industry where people basically look back and say what went well, what went poorly, where's areas for learning, and so forth. In a pre-mortem, when you set out on a new venture or you have a new project or a new company, whatever, you can kind of go through what are the things that went wrong and kind of put yourself into the future. And at least, writing them down or even having a mental list of those things. Okay, this went wrong, funding fell through, project didn't work, or something, actually gets you more prepared. What happened and why? And maybe you'll avoid some of those rocks that you've set out in your pre-mortem because you're constantly, it's in the back of your mind and allows you to think clearly when those things become actual, should they become actual. And it can also be opportunities of what goes well, why did it go well, so you're ready to seize the day when the time comes. Now, one of the cheapest ways to prepare yourself is to read. And I'm not just saying business books and, in general, but also when you see the news, you see other leaders behaving in different circumstances or making choices in different circumstances. What would you do in their shoes? What are your values and where should you drive organizations in those moments when they're in the limelight? And then, not to be underrated either, is discussion. So discussing internally with your team, with your colleagues, and getting different perspectives from different disciplines, but also talking to people outside the industry and outside your organization, because there are countless times when folks outside of games have said, well, why didn't you do this? And then you kind of go, well, that's not the way we do things in game development. And then you kind of go, well, why not? And there may be solutions there that you haven't looked at and haven't considered. Last but not least, maybe the most fun of these is the hive mind, when you try to forecast the future and to see what things will happen. It can be something as simple as a sales forecast or something like that. And what I've found is if you get about 6 to 12 people, informed people, to give you their estimate of something just for fun, and they write down a number and you take the median of those, usually you end up in the right ballpark. Sometimes everybody's wrong, but those are also interesting moments to see, okay, what did we learn from this? Why was everybody wrong? What was the factor that we missed? But more often than not, that 6 to 12 people group will pretty much nail it. And what I try to do with these things is to keep them playful and not to make them too serious. So, hey, give a burger, give a bottle of wine when those hive mind moments happen. Whoever gets it closest wins, and it's just the game. But it also gives you information and gives you insight. All right. It's better to strive for perfection than to aim for mediocrity and succeed. This I think is better done once again. Trying to aim for the stars is not something you do when you go super, super quick. When you go super, super quick, you go for the convenient and you go for the kind of common. If you go for the common, you often end up commonly in the middle and aim for mediocrity. If you want to kind of have your moonshot and to take a real shot on goal and knocking it out of the park, you often need to stop, think, and then try to execute towards that. And that requires taking the time to rethink and to think slow and to figure out what is the end goal, what is the aspiration, how can you reach it? And truly, it's not something that happens conveniently or quickly. Good leadership for me means optionality, building different cases and being ready for, okay, if plan A is the plan of record, that's what you're looking at. It's nice to have thought out of a plan B and possibly a plan C. Optionality usually comes with a cost. It's not free. It requires time. It might be a drag on your time. It might be a drag on the project if you're building a game for certain contingencies. If the core gameplay loop doesn't work this way, then at least we can revert back to this known convention or to this convention. And those often mean that these things take longer because you're actually keeping doors open. From a business perspective, I remember fondly one of the nicest and smartest guys in game development, Myllyrinne, the former CFO of Remedy, had already started thinking about these different models for example, for funding. And we needed funding into the studio back in 2008. And Mika had already built a plan for a syndicated loan that would replace traditional milestone funding. And we started that in August of 2008, and I think we executed around May 2009. It's a long time ago, but this was when the financial markets were melting and basically nobody was getting loans for anything. But because we had prepared, we had kind of looked at different alternatives and how we could model it and kind of what we could do. We actually managed to have a package ready in a very turbulent financial environment and under the gun to bring in money. And with that financing, we were able to guarantee being able to get development done and to maintain the independence and the upside of the studio. And a lot of that is basically the forethought and building the optionality from somebody who's even-keeled and smart. All right, there is a time to commit and deliver. So once again, procrastination and slow leadership are not the same thing. You do need to set yourself on targets and to aim for that moonshot or wherever you decide to aim for and to deliver on that. And once again, the worst thing is not to make a decision. So this is not a talk about the benefits of procrastinating forever, but advocating a slower approach to leadership and decision-making often. Okay. A big thought here, it doesn't take a lot of strength to hang on. It takes a lot of strength to let go. Now, there's been a lot said about grit and perseverance lately, and frankly, I love the book myself and understand the points and appreciate them. But true leadership is also knowing when to let go. Just like in our personal lives, sometimes it's time to let go of a certain phase in your life, a certain friendship or relationship that's no longer working, or whatever, and kind of to move on. I mean, to persistently try to do something despite all the odds and constantly bang your head against the wall is probably not the way forward. And I think the hardest thing for us to give up is ideas or opinions. Often we hold a preconception of how something should work, or this really should work, or this is the way forward. And that's often, when it turns out not to be fruitful, we champion the person who's, perseverantly banging their heads against the wall. It takes true courage and true leadership to let go and to go for another path and to find a new angle of attack. I mean, failure is a part of the process as well. Failing slowly is not. Now, the number one thing we can do as leaders is to provide an environment of safety. Why? Innovation and that learning organization don't happen without a sense of safety. And building safety is not something you do quickly. Building that sense of safety and a organization and an environment where different opinions can be said requires your persistent work from day to day to day, and requires that slow, meticulous leadership. Now, the Greeks have a wonderful saying. It goes somewhere along the lines of societies become great when men plant trees that they can't sit in the shade of, or they know they'll never sit in the shade of those trees. And I think good leadership is often similar. When we plant those seeds that don't bear fruit immediately, it's not something you're going to see this week, next quarter, maybe not this year, but on the longer term, they will benefit the business and your organization and what you're doing. To take time to plant those seeds now and enjoy the fruits of that sometime in the future, or your successor will enjoy the fruits of that. All right, and a nice picture on safety, because hey, why not? And since we're throwing out quotes, this is another good one to think about as well. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So be excellent. Make it a habit. All right. Reading references. Last but not least, here are some books that have inspired me, some lately and some time ago. A really, really good book on the benefit of rethinking and what I'd call leading slowly. That's where it will lead you, is Think Again by Adam Grant. A great book on crisis management is The Agony of Decisions. And, there is the classic there. Of course, if you haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow, you probably should. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed doing this for you and hope to have a good interactive Q&A session. And we shall look at the poll soon. Yes. And if you ever have doubts in those dark moments, remember, as leaders, our character is defined on those tough days, and the strength of our organization will only be stronger as we come through them. And those moments of crises are also moments of opportunity, and to define the destiny of your studio and yourself as a leader. And here's my contact information if you want to reach out on social media and stuff. Would be happy to discuss. Thank you very much, and speak to you shortly. Bye.
And we're here. Matias, welcome to the stream.
Happy to be here.
Yep, it's so good to have you here in person, actually. This is a very, very rare treat, I guess, for both of us, pandemic times. Thanks for the fascinating talk so far. How long has it taken for you to sort of gather these thoughts that you just blasted to us for like 40 minutes?
I don't know. Like I do a lot of reading, and I guess the pandemic for most of us is. If there's one benefit to the pandemic,
You get to read.
You get to read more. So I think there's been time to reflect more now than ever. So
yeah, makes sense. That actually sort of bridges at least the first question that I had. That, of course, my context is in startups, but also the same problem in bigger companies. How do you carve out the time to think slow?
So I'm not a huge fan of Microsoft in general. They do some things that are not great, but Outlook has this very simple thing: focus time, and that's actually something I embrace from Cortana.
Right.
So just making sure that there's 2 hours, at least 3-4 times a week. And that you actually have time to sit down and, I often set a theme for those sessions and go like, okay, I'm going to think about this or that. And then, make sure that happens. And it doesn't need to be kind of a grind. So, I'm, I guess like most of us, I'm slightly a hedonist. So, okay, that can mean that I go for a coffee or I maybe go exercise or go for a walk, but that's what I think about. And oftentimes, things start to be much more clear by just taking some distance away from, the eternal Slack messages and Discords and whatever.
Fair enough. So you basically, to paraphrase, so you book in special time just for digesting and coming up with plans and basically actively communicate to others that this is what you're doing. It's not something that happens magically in the background.
No. I mean, if you don't put it into the calendar, it won't happen.
Yes. Fair enough. And that's kind of interesting. Is that something you've developed over time, or do you see that you found the right balance?
I think it keeps on evolving. Okay, I'm old. I've been doing this for a while, but I think around 2008, 2009, when we were pushing hard on Alan Wake, and it was taking a very long time to get done. I found that I needed some time for myself as well. And I would steal every other Thursday till lunchtime. And that was like, okay, I had half a day twice a month to just, do things that I needed to process. And I think it benefited everybody having kind of more clarity on my thinking. And now I don't really do a half a day away, but I do take those 2-hour slots, maybe 3-4 times a week.
Yeah. Perfect. We do have some questions coming in from the stream, so thanks guys, keep those coming. I think this is almost directly related. So what have been your toughest decisions in your career, and how specifically did you handle them, slow or fast?
I think the hardest decisions or the hardest matters really are, it's when, I have to say it relates to people, and having to let somebody go or to move them away from a position when they're genuinely trying and they really want to do the best for everybody, but it's not working. Those I think are always tough decisions, because if you don't care, you shouldn't be leading a studio anyway. So I think those are tough decisions. I would say that throughout the years you kind of understand that that's necessary for everybody, and usually people are much happier afterwards anyway. But ultimately it shouldn't be easy. If it becomes too easy, then you're turning into Dexter.
For sure. So then specifically, is that a fast or a slow decision, or how should that be handled? Because I've heard personally both ways. Like in some senses, when it doesn't work, and you should react immediately when it doesn't work. But then again,
I don't know. Like I've seen people turn things around as well and become superstars. It's not very common. But it does happen. And oftentimes, like what I try to do more and more, obviously if you have the luxury of doing this, you have the time and the resources, the money, what have you, but you can also look at different positions for people. And, kind of like their strengths are really here. Originally, we thought that they would be good at this, but, can you put them into a position where they can play to their strengths? And that's more of kind of where I try to approach it.
Interesting. So you talked about the sort of safety and I guess like almost decisiveness, having a certain momentum in decision making that creates safety for everybody else, stability.
Yeah.
How does that work when you have a bigger organization and people come up to you and they have problems, they need support? And specifically, what do you think is the right balance between being here for them, whatever the problem is, versus bring me solutions, not problems. You should have thought about this before. You're overwhelmed. You're getting where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think more and more, like, honestly, I can't, there are very, very few cases where leaders or managers should dictate how to do things. You know, they maybe setting the priorities and setting kind of the guidelines of, okay, it can take this long, and you know, this is kind of roughly what it needs to do or whatever. But I just don't believe in. I think the time for the whole micromanagement, you know, thing of it's just so kind of 1992.
Yeah.
I don't think it really works. On the other hand, I think the biggest question we usually answer is why. Like, why are we doing this?
Right.
Like, okay, you're designing a feature into the game. Why are you designing that feature? Well, guess what? This segment of the gamers needs whatever, blah, 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 or we need to improve engagement, retention, whatever. But starting with the why, and oftentimes what you're actually doing changes, because they're going like, well, we don't need to build that. That's going to take longer. We can actually do this small thing here and, you know, get the same results and whatever. So I think going back to why is often a good move.
Yeah. And essentially allows people to help themselves or make better choices by themselves.
Exactly.
It gives the context. Yeah, makes sense. I often heard that being described as making the problems fair for everybody involved. If they don't have the knowledge or the goal or the why, it's a really unfair task to do.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of phrasing it.
Yeah. So here's another question that sort of relates to distributing decisions. Yeah. So do you have any decision-making tips for teams where members are on the same level in the hierarchy at organizations? I guess implied in the question is that there's not necessarily a clear boss, or that at least there's an expectation of everybody being their own boss and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I think you kind of, the longer you kind of look at it, some things actually should be decided democratically.
Such as,
shall we move the office from Espoo to Helsinki? You know, people have lives.
Yeah.
They have yes. So you know, they have lives, and you know, they've obligations in their everyday stuff. Then I think some things should be done by an oligarchy of meritocracy. Like, okay, these guys actually know how to build a camera system. Maybe they should be the guys who are deciding what the camera system looks like. And then I think some things should be done with a benevolent dictatorship, such as cash. Like, you don't want a committee looking after the finances. Like, trust me, it's just a terrible idea.
Yeah. Makes sense. So I guess in this case, if I sort of read between the lines, the tip is to, yes, it's a flat hierarchy. Yes, everybody has a voice, but you delegate responsibilities and then measure, improve all that.
Yeah, and hopefully somebody has the best expertise for whatever the question at hand is.
Yeah, absolutely. And when making hard decisions, do you roll the ball through other people? If you do, who are the people you roll the ball through?
I'm super lucky to work with great co-founders. So if we have, it doesn't necessarily even need to be like a hard, I think it's easier for us always to focus on the negative, but it can also be kind of like a more proactive, opportunity-driven thing. But even those, I think, are best bounced around. And I'm super lucky to work with Katja, Milos, and Mumi, and get the support from them.
Yeah.
And we have a seasoned team of experts that you can also bounce around ideas with. Luckily enough, these days business intelligence or the marketing guys, and you can kind of sometimes go like, could you quantify this? Like, what does this really look like?
Right.
And so that's I think is a luxury that we're getting into these days.
Yeah.
So, but definitely those. And then I do have a network of friends, having worked in games for a while, where I can lean on and ask, very quickly they'll understand the context, and they can also give feedback. Folks I've worked with or folks I've gotten to know in the industry. So I do bounce ideas off a lot, to be frank.
Yeah. So essentially, you've built a network both in terms of your co-founders and trusted senior people, as well as just colleagues in the industry.
Yeah.
So that when you're making that tough decision, you can reach out to somebody who's got domain experience or or just maybe life experience.
Life experience. And I have to say that the game scene here in Finland is super supportive. Anyway, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
So the kind of the hurdle to ask for help is very low.
Yeah.
And I think people actually I've never really had anybody who says, well, I'm not going to help you. Like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that fair. Except maybe that one guy that I met once, but that's an exception. That's actually directly related that I'm kind of interested in. Life experience versus domain or hard game development experience when it comes to leadership and hard decisions. Do you see a pattern at all? Is it more about having had a range of experiences in life, or is it more about having had very deep experience in what you're doing, or do you see any kind of pattern one way?
I think both work, and certainly like all of us want to work in a company where the CTO has very deep domain experience, right?
Yes.
So that would be helpful. Myself, I'm more of a generalist. I'm not terribly good at anything creative or technical, period.
Yeah.
But just understanding people and money already kind of helps you too, and maybe strategy and tactics. Those kinds of things, I think they come with time, and like you say, pattern recognition. You've been there before. You're kind of going like, okay, if it smells and looks like the same thing that happened 3 times already, it's probably the same thing that happened 3 times already.
Yeah. That makes sense. And here's more. So how would you recognize a problem or area that requires leading slow, or does it come intuitively? Seems like leading slow requires building more healthy and logical approaches and mindset that then comes naturally in decision making.
I think that's maybe something that comes through experience, but equally I would say that my gut feeling now is oftentimes we tend to lead too fast. My kind of default now is to stop for a moment before I act and kind of question and rethink, like, do I really have all the facts? Do I really understand? Like, why am I? Because we become creature of habit, right? It's very convenient to react in the same way that you've always done, or to act on an impulse or an emotion or reflex. And those moments, like just taking the 10 seconds of your life to just think through it before acting is a healthy thing to do.
Yeah. So in this sense, I'm kind of thinking about the question, how would you recognize an area where you specifically need to lead slow? Would you basically say that you kind of double check yourself each case? Yeah. And then you'll know if that's okay.
That's almost, that is very, like, I think that's the way it kind of works, at least works for me. That I need to kind of stop myself from acting rather than, So there's a tendency, like people who lead or manage, they do that because they enjoy making decisions and moving things forward and benefiting everybody, blah blah blah. Yeah. But I think there's also with those patterns and those kind of motivations, we need to double check ourselves and hold ourselves back every now and then and go, okay,
Yeah, directly related. I'm a big fan of the sort of delayed mode chat where you send a message, send an email, and it actually takes a minute to go. Yeah. So then you get to think for a minute, do I really want it to let it go, or should I cancel it? Exactly. Something else.
And what's the rule of social media? Like, if you're thinking, should I post this on Twitter? You probably shouldn't post it.
If only. Excellent.
Hey, speaking of Twitter,
yes,
we have the poll.
Perfect.
Let's see. Wow. Okay. So, is your company a performance organization or a learning organization? 83% work in a learning organization, which is great.
That's unexpected.
That's nice.
Yeah. Excellent. Something's happening. Things are progressing for sure. Maybe I just want to drop in one final question before our time is up.
Yeah.
How do you keep from burning out, or the people around you from burning out? Because and the context for the question is that games are notoriously bad for demanding a lot, especially from people who are in charge of the money, of the existential questions. And oftentimes, as people say, if you don't know what your biggest problems are, you really have a big problem.
Yeah.
So you're sort of always on the hook of
Yeah.
being on the negative and being challenging and all that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with it?
So I mean, one is, I have worked with wonderful people, I have friends, a lovely family. So, there's other things than work. It doesn't define me as a person.
Yeah.
And equally, I don't think we're really defined, like, how would I say it? Like, we're making entertainment, right?
Yeah.
We're not solving the pandemic. And, it's a noble try. We entertain millions of people worldwide. We, make their lives more enjoyable, more fun, social, whatever. But it's still entertainment. So, not taking ourselves too seriously, I think, is part of it. And I think, secondly, a lot of people stress or burn out by uncertainty. And there's things you can impact. There's things you can, actually drive towards a direction. And then there's things you can't. And you kind of like the things you can't influence, why worry too much about them? Like ultimately, if there's a financial crisis or trade war or whatever, you're probably not going to be able to influence that. So I would kind of like let that go. Yeah. And then the things that you can impact, just processing them and saying, what are you going to do about them? And then the best thing we can do as leaders is to have even the odds, tilt them a little bit in our favor. Yeah. By doing smart things and, doing the right kind of analysis and working on the right matters in our organizations and our games. But ultimately, you're playing with the odds. It's still entertainment.
Yeah. So biggest kind of my takeaway from what you said is you can never be 100% sure that you're going to win. So as long as you play the odds, have a plan B, all that, you'll be fine. Exactly. You've done enough.
It'll be fun. It'll all be fine.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Matias, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
It's super fun to have you on the stream. And if people want to get in touch, are you guys hiring by any chance?
Oh, yes, we are. 21 nationalities today and about 70 people, mostly here in Helsinki. And yes, we do have positions open, and there will be more to come as well. So do check those out. Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Take care, guys, and see you around the social media and hopefully in real life soon.
Catch you later.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.